History is full of stories that can be proven, and stories that can't be dismissed quiet so easily. For more than 200 years, one family in northern Tennessee has stood at the intersection of both. Their story has inspired books, documentaries, and generations of debate. Every October, visitors still travel to the tiny town of Adams, Tennessee, searching for answers to a question no one has been able to settle. What really happened on the Bell farm? In 1804, a farmer named John Bell moved his family from North Carolina to what was then the Tennessee frontier. He purchased more than 300 acres in what is now Robertson County, not far from the Kentucky border, and built a life there with his wife, Lucy, and their 9 children. By all accounts, John Bell wasn't an extraordinary man. He was a respected farmer, a churchgoer, a husband, and a father. Nothing in the surviving records suggests he was looking for attention or that he expected his family's name to be remembered long after his death. This is also where it's important to draw a line between history and tradition. Much of what follows comes from family recollections that weren't written down until decades later. That doesn't automatically make those accounts untrue, but it does mean we'll separate what's documented from what's been remembered as we go. According to those early family recollections, everything began in 1817. While working in his cornfield, John Bell reportedly noticed an unusual animal moving through the crops. He described it as having the body of a dog, but the head of a rabbit. Believing it to be some unknown wild animal, he fired at it. The creature disappeared into the field. Whether it was an oddly shaped animal, a trick of the light, or something else entirely, no one can say. At the time, it appears to have been little more than a strange story to tell at home. But it wasn't the last. Later family accounts describe other unsettling encounters that followed in the weeks ahead. John's son, Drew, reportedly saw an unusually large bird perched on a fence, so large that he later insisted it didn't resemble anything he recognized. His daughter, Betsy, claimed she saw what looked like a young girl, dressed in green, swinging from the branch of a tree, before vanishing without a trace. An enslaved man on the Bell property, remembered in later accounts as Dean, reportedly spoke of being followed home by a large black dog that seemed to appear out of nowhere before disappearing just as mysteriously. On their own, none of those stories would have meant very much. Every rural community has tales of strange animals, unexplained sights, and things glimpsed from the corner of the eye. Nonetheless, the Bells family believed something changed when the strange encounters stopped happening outside, and whatever has been watching seemed to move into the house. Inside the Bell home, the first signs weren't dramatic. They were subtle, easy to dismiss. The family said it began with sounds no one could explain. At first it was scratching, the kind of scratching that makes you think rats have found their way into the walls or beneath the floorboards. Then came the sound of something chewing on the wooden bedposts. John Bell and his sons searched for the source, but every time they carried a lantern into the room where the noise seemed to be coming from, stopped, only to begin somewhere else. As the nights passed, the disturbances reportedly became harder to ignore. The Bells spoke of heavy chains dragging across the floor long after everyone had gone to bed. At other times, It sounded like large dogs fighting somewhere inside the house. Then there were the loud knocks against the walls and doors, often with no obvious source. The family searched the property. Neighbors were asked if they'd heard anything unusual. Nothing ever explained the sounds. Then the disturbances seemed to change. They no longer surrounded the family. The disturbances appeared to single people out. Bestie Belle, the youngest daughter still living at home, reportedly woke, night after night, convinced someone or something had been pulling her hair. She later described unseen hands pinching her arms and slapping her face while she lay in bed. Some mornings, her bed covers were found scattered across the room, as though they'd been ripped away while she slept. Other members of the household claimed to experience similar encounters, but two names appeared again and again whenever the family told the story: John Bell, Betsy. Lucy Bell, by contrast, was said to have been treated with surprising gentleness. Whether that reflected reality, perception, or the family's own attempt to make sense of frightening events, they became convinced whatever was happening wasn't random. It seemed deliberate and almost personal. Around the same time, John Bell's health continued to decline. The family believed the strange events and his illness were somehow connected, even though no one could explain how. Then, as the disturbances grew bolder, they crossed a line no one in the house expected. The knocking, scratching, and unseen attacks were no longer the most unsettling part of the story. Before long, something began to speak. Initially, the responses were simple. The family claimed the strange knocks and scratches no longer happened at random. They seemed to answer questions. One knock for yes, two for no. Whether coincidence or something more, the Bells became convinced an intelligence was responding to them. Then, the story took another extraordinary turn. The sounds became words, and according to the family's narrative, an unseen voice began speaking inside the house. It was little more than whispers, then short replies, and eventually, they said, it could carry on full conversations. Visitors later claimed they heard it recite passages from the Bible, sing hymns, and discuss scripture with local ministers. Others said it seemed to know private details about people it had never met. If those accounts are accurate, it's easy to understand why news of the Bell farm spread so quickly across northern Tennessee. People weren't just hearing stories anymore. They wanted to hear the voice for themselves. They came out of curiosity. Others came hoping to expose a fraud, while many simply wanted to witness something that they believed was impossible. As more visitors arrived, the mysterious presence became known by the name Kate. Whether the name came from the voice itself or from those who claimed to hear it depends on which version of the story you read. Either way, before long everyone was talking about Kate. That name also belonged to a real woman living in Robertson County. Mary Catherine Batts, better known as Kate Batts, was the wife of a local farmer named Frederick Batts. By all accounts, she was an unconventional woman who didn't always fit comfortably within the expectations of her small rural community. She also had an indirect connection to John Bell. Years earlier, a dispute had reportedly arisen between Bell and a member of the Batts family involving the sale of an enslaved person. Whether that disagreement had anything to do with the events at the Bell farm has never been established. In fact, no evidence has ever linked Kate Batts herself to the disturbances. Yet, in a close-knit frontier community searching for answers, suspicion often settled on the person who already seemed different. Over time, the lines between the woman and the legend began to blur. The name Kate became inseparable from the haunting, even though history offers no evidence that Mary Catherine Batts was responsible for anything beyond becoming part of the story. And as word continued to spread, the Bell farm attracted attention far beyond Robertson County. According to the legend, even one of the most famous men in America, Andrew Jackson, decided he wanted to see the mystery for himself. Whether he ever visited the Bell farm remains one of the most debated questions in the entire Bell Witch story. But the legend surrounding his visit became so influential that for many people, it's the moment the Bell Witch stopped being local folklore and became part of American history. According to the legend, Jackson, then a celebrated military general, years before becoming President of the United States, decided to see the Bell farm for himself after hearing reports of the strange disturbances. As the story goes, he arrived with several companions by wagon. But before they reached the house, something unexpected happened. The wagon suddenly stopped, and the horses strained against their harnesses. The men climbed down and tried to push, but nothing moved. Then a voice broke the silence. It welcomed Jackson's party and promised they would have some fun before the night was over. Just as suddenly as it had stopped, the wagon rolled forward again. The stories become even more dramatic from there. Some versions claim members of Jackson's party were harassed through the night by unseen forces. One skeptical visitor was supposedly slapped repeatedly by an invisible hand until he fled the house. And by morning, Jackson is said to have remarked that he'd rather fight the British again than spend another night with the Bell Witch. It's a memorable story, but it's also one historians urge us to treat with caution, because despite years of research, no contemporary letter, diary, military record, or personal writing from Andrew Jackson mentions a visit to the Bell farm. Though that doesn't prove it never happened, history is full of events that were never written down. Nevertheless, the most famous episode in the Bell Witch legend cannot be independently verified, and that's an important distinction. The legend may be old, but the written version most people know today is much younger. The first detailed account wasn't published until 1894, more than 70 years after John Bell's death. Its author, Martin Van Buren Ingram, gathered stories preserved through family memories and local tradition into a single narrative titled An Authenticated History of the Famous Bell Witch. Then, in 1934, John Bell's great-grandsons, Charles Bailey Bell, published another account that largely supported Ingram's version while adding details passed down within the family. Neither author claimed to be an eyewitness. Both were recording memories that had survived across generations. And in all of those memories, one fact, however, isn't disputed. John Bell's health continued to decline. One morning by late 1820, the family found John unconscious after another violent episode. Near his bed sat a small glass vial containing a dark liquid. No one in the household claimed it belonged there. Family members later said the unseen voice announced that it had given John Bell the poison that ended his life. Whether that statement reflected something supernatural, a misunderstood illness, or simply a family's attempt to explain an unexplained death, history can't tell us. What we do know is that John Bell died in December 1820 at the age of 70. And after his death, the disturbances seemed to stop for a while. But if the Bell family's story is to be believed, the silence wasn't the end. It was only an intermission with John Bell gone. For the first time in years, the Bell family had something they hadn't experienced in a long while: silence. Though it wasn't permanent, they claimed the presence promised it would return in 7 years, and according to the story, it did. In 1828, John Bell Jr. later said the entity appeared briefly, spoke with him about the family's past, and even made predictions before disappearing once again. Then came one final promise. It would return in another 107 years. That would have been 1935. But here's where the historical trail grows quiet. Despite decades of searching, historians have found no contemporary account from any Bell descendant describing a dramatic return that year. If anything happened, it left no clear record behind. Now maybe nothing happened at all, or maybe the story had finally reached its natural ending. Either way, history offers no answer, and perhaps that's fitting, because uncertainty has always been at the heart of the Bell Witch story. So, what can we actually say with confidence? We know John Bell was a real man. We know he lived in Robertson County, Tennessee. We know he died in December of 1820 after a prolonged illness, and we also know stories about the strange events at his farm were already circulating locally long before they were collected into books decades later. Those facts are well established. Everything beyond that becomes far more difficult to separate, as there are no surviving physical artifacts that explain what happened. No recordings, no contemporary investigation or scientific evidence proving a haunting ever took place. At the same time, there's no evidence that conclusively explains why so many people believed something extraordinary was happening at the Bell farm in the first place. Then there's Kate Batts. History remembers her because of the legend. But history also reminds us of something else. No evidence has ever connected the real Mary Catherine Batts to the events that unfolded at the Bell farm. Over time, a real woman became inseparable from a story she may have had nothing to do with. That, perhaps, is one of the few genuine tragedies this legend leaves behind. Today, the original Bell farm has long since changed, but the story hasn't. Visitors still travel to Adams, Tennessee. Many explore the nearby Bell Witch Cave. Every year, the community celebrates its unusual place in American folklore. Possibly that's why the Bell Witch has endured for more than 2 centuries, because it refuses to disappear. Some will hear this story and see nothing more than grief, fear, misunderstood illness, and a legend that grew with every generation that repeated it. Then there are those who will believe something truly unexplainable happened on that Tennessee farm. The evidence is unlikely to settle that argument now. Perhaps it never could. Nonetheless, one question has survived longer than any witness. longer than any written account, and even longer than the Bell family themselves. What really happened on the Bell farm? Whatever your answer, the mystery has been waiting more than 200 years to hear it.